Hello and welcome. My name is Cheryl Babin. I'm a designer of professional learning at the Calgary Regional Consortium. Thank you for joining me for this short video today while we look together at responsive planning that can meet students' needs. I'd like to start today with a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge today that this gathering, this work, this important consideration of our assessment practices is taking place on the traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Spanning generations, acknowledgement of this land is a traditional custom of Indigenous peoples and an important part of reconciliation. Gives voice to the authentic history of the land and its original people. Honoring the land in this way acknowledges the story of creation of this country in a way that has historically been missing. And this is always an important part of how we begin our work, and so thank you for joining me in that moment. Before we go into looking specifically at the responsive planning templates, and we have multiple templates for you, I just want to remind you that in our work at the Calgary Regional Consortium, we really come together with a shared approach. We want you to know that in everything that we do, we believe that the students in your care matter the most. We wanted to use this opportunity to consider innovation and change in our practice, always knowing that great pedagogy will always empower the learning that is actually going to change the students in our care. And while we consider new curriculum, we want to acknowledge that a shift and changes in our practice will take time. And we want to be able to honor the time that is necessary and the speed at which you'd like to implement and take the time you need to make it great. Today we're drawing on the idea that comes from the First People's Principles of Learning, that learning involves patience and time. And so to that end, we really want to think about how our planning might be responsive to the needs of learners. And when the learning maybe isn't happening as quickly as we want to, or through the approach that we've taken, we want to be able to respond and retrace our steps so that we can really go back and try again and really search to find the route that will make it successful for students. Our work today in this lens of looking at our planning through that responsive approach makes two connections to the TQS in terms of a critical ongoing reflection to improve teaching and learning, and demonstrating a professional body of knowledge that really looks at effective planning, instruction, and assessment practices. So with all of that said, the target for our session today is that we will really explore a planning strategy that responds to students' ongoing needs, and we will flexibly plan long-range and unit designs. With so many factors to consider, it's a wonder that we really need to come together and think about how we can create a long-range plan that's actually useful for the group of students that you have in that moment. There's all of these different fundamental parts, and we wanted to look at finding a way to design a long range and a unit planner that could be flexible and not just sort of a dusty document that only emerges when at the beginning or the end of a year. And so we really thought about what would be the criteria that could help to make a responsive planning document really effective. And so here you'll find a list of criteria that we are calling our must strive to meet pieces. This is what we're really trying to do with this document. We want to make sure that we acknowledge that we teach children, not a checklist of outcomes, but that our work is really foundationally and always about the students in our care. We wanted this document to be useful, not just about compliance and completing checkboxes or filling in some sort of a scope and sequence that isn't useful in terms of driving learning forward. Most importantly, we wanted this document to be responsive and inclusive for all students in our care. We needed it to be easy for teachers. We don't want it to be too time-consuming or too difficult to decipher, too many moving parts. We know how busy teachers are. We know how hard you're working, and we wanted to try to come up with a way that this could be useful and pulled all together in the same way. We wanted to focus on assessment for learning and using every learning experience, that everything matters. All of those component parts will contribute to improving learning for students. So knowing that our assessment practices are the most influential and have the potential to create change and growth for students happens during that formative period. And so I hope you'll see in these templates that we've really created space for that to be the focal point and the priority. We also want to always think about learning for transfer, that it's not just about recalling knowledge and performing skills on demand, but rather applying those pieces and knowing when to do something with it. We want to be able to transfer learning to new and authentic situations and really use those competencies in a progressive way to really demonstrate evidence of learning. And ultimately, we need our plans to be shareable, editable, and realistic, because we know what the demands on teachers are these days, and it's important that we really strive to meet them. So as you're looking through the planners today, please make sure that you check and see if we've been successful in meeting this criteria. I want to let you know where you will find this document. Now, if you go to our website at crcpd.ab.ca, you will find in the top right-hand corner a Curriculum Implementation Support tab. If you click into that tab, you will come to a page where you can just scroll down. You'll see a label for New Curriculum Implementation Supports, and then a section that is primarily for instructional leaders but teachers are welcome to go in as well, to look at a plethora of downloadable free resources that we've created to help with your implementation process. Click into the image where it says Training Materials and View Now, and you will come to a Google Drive folder that's labeled Asynchronous Materials. Within that folder, you'll see another spot called Responsive Planning Documents for Teachers, and that is where you will find this template where you can make a copy and make it your own. Before I give you a tour of the long range and unit plans, I want to let you know that this is one Google Sheet document that has multiple tabs. So when you get in there, and you can make a copy of your own, name it appropriately, put it in your own drive, make it yours, and adapt and modify it to your context in particular. One of the important features that we want to highlight before we get into it is that we have created multiple sheets within this one document. And so you'll see at the bottom, there are several tabs. They're not all visible from this image capture, but you'll see that it begins with the responsive long-range plan template, learning outcomes for long-range plan, and a unit planning template, and then a couple more added features that I will show you in just a minute. So once we get into the document, please make sure that you're looking at those multiple sheets within that document so that you will be able to access all of the features. Should you have any questions along the way, or suggestions or success stories, please reach out to us at register@crcpd.ab.ca. And so I will bring you over to a copy of this long-range plan now, so that you can hear a little bit more about how we designed it and what we're hoping it will help you to do. If at any point you're finding that it's a little bit tricky to see, you can stop the video, pull the document up within another tab in your browser, so that you can take a look at it as you're hearing me talk through some of the pieces. Now, the first sheet in this Google document is the responsive long-range plan. And we know that long-range plans are often confused with a scope and sequence, or sometimes they're like a year at a glance or an overview. And we recognize that each of those different types of documents have a different purpose. The purpose of this particular long-range plan is to make consideration for when and how you might cluster learning outcomes, and when and where they might fall into your overall planning. We want to give you the opportunity to sort of plot some of those features into a year plan to give an overarching idea, but it's not something that is just done once at the beginning of the year, but rather we're really encouraging you to make it a habit to come back into this document every week or two to readjust and to reflect on how it's been going and where you need to go from there. And so the first feature that I'd like to point out is here in row 4, where it says including all learners. Across the entire scope of this particular sheet, we have embedded intentional strategies and questions that can help you to really consider how you might be including all learners. Think about ways that you can build a culture for learning, use and collect evidence of student strength through each of the experiences that you use. Think about how you can capture diagnostic and formative assessment so that you can really use that data to inform your next steps in terms of your planning. We've included a few different templates leaning on the brilliant work of Shelley Moore in terms of a class review. There's a guided walkthrough through this link here, and then a version of a template that you can use as well. So we're also trying to embed some resources into this document that we hope you'll find useful. You'll then see in this teal section here that we have outlined the month, the week within the month coming up for 2022-23, and we've left a space for school events and key dates. We know that when the Terry Fox Run is happening in your school, you need to block off some time to make sure that your planning is accommodating for these other important aspects of what happens in your school. And this is all part of great learning that takes place. In this section here, it's a spot for you to add in your meet the teacher nights or your curriculum nights, or perhaps there's a performance or an opportunity for students to have parents come into the building. You can use this space in here to track some of those things so that you can always have them at the ready. We have frozen the first columns there so that you can toggle through and just drag along, and you can see that we have the inclusive learners comments as well as the dates and spaces for key events. As you scroll down a little bit, you will see that on this left-hand side, we have a series of different columns that will help to create a structure for how this long-range responsive plan will play out. We've given some space for key concepts and guiding questions. Now, the architecture of the curriculum is such that the organizing ideas and the guiding questions are embedded with concepts in there. So when you choose several learning outcomes that you would like to use, you can use those outcomes to pull out some of the key concepts that you would like to focus on during that particular time. And so we have prompts here to remind you of what kinds of things we're sort of encouraging you to look for in those during those time periods. And then you'll notice here that every 2 weeks we have this yellow bar that comes in through the calendar of planning. And it's during this time that we really encourage you to reflect, respond, and recover. Recover is a word that we learned from Katie White, who talks about really embedding time for students to use the feedback that they're given given from you in terms of formative assessment. It's one thing to sort of offer that feedback out, but what we do need to really do is make sure that we're embedding intentional time for students to interpret that information or that feedback, to understand it, and then to do something with it. They need to act on it at that point. And so it's at this moment where you as a teacher are reflecting on what revisions are necessary, what extensions do you need to add into, in what ways do you need to revisit some of the information that has been perhaps not quite mastered by certain students, or if you're not getting all students to mastery because of a variety of reasons, and we know that that's okay, that there are opportunities for you to reflect and think about what next steps will happen for them. There's a couple of tools in here, such as the class support plan, that can help you to really facilitate that inclusive way of incorporating deep learning for all students. As you move down the template here, you will see that we've really focused on the key assessments. We want to use assessment to drive the planning because it's not just about all tests and quizzes, but rather a triangulated collection of learning experiences that help to reveal what students really know and what they can do and what they understand. And so here is a prompt that says, how will I measure mastery of learning outcomes using multiple and varied sources of data? What evidence of learning will I respond to as we progress through the outcomes? We've offered a color-coded way of capturing, is it a conversation that you're having with students at this point? Is it an observation that you're making while they're engaging in a group discussion about their learning? Or are they using manipulatives in math that you want to watch how they perform and how they can uncover the answer to a problem? We've also offered a chance for you to sort of code some of those assessments. D for diagnostic, an F for ongoing or formative or assessment for learning, and S for summative or an evaluation of the learning. And so throughout these sections in here, that's an opportunity for you to indicate what kinds of learning experiences you'll be using to gather that data of students. We really think it's important to always choose to intentionally address competencies through every opportunity that you can. So although you might really be addressing and incorporating many of the competencies all the time, we would like to suggest that you choose one or two that you're really making visible in your modeling of the student work, or if you're thinking about managing information, that you're being explicit about teaching the skills that have to be incorporated into the learning at that place. So this blue box here offers you a chance to say, yeah, for this particular week, we're really thinking about managing information, and I want to put that into my plan so I can make it really visible and make sure that I do what I want to do there. Now it's time to start thinking about the learning outcomes. And so as we come to understand and really become familiar with the new curriculum, the New Learn Alberta site is the housing place for all of these outcomes and also the cusps that fall within them. So underneath the organizing idea, your guiding question, and then you have the learning outcomes with all of the knowledge, understanding, skills, and procedures that are embedded within each learning outcome. We wanted to make this really easy for you. And so we have included another tab here, which is right beside, or another sheet at the bottom here. And I'm just going to click over to it right now because I want to show you that we have included learning outcomes for the 3 subjects that are being implemented this coming September. So we have outcomes for K to 6, even though it's only mandatory to implement to grade 3, for English language arts, for math, and for phys ed and wellness, which is being implemented all the way to grade 6. So if you scroll down, you'll see first English. They're not in any priority in terms of importance, but rather just alphabetical order in terms of the subject areas. So for scrolling down here, you can see in kindergarten, there is a PDF version of all of the English language arts and literature outcomes for kindergarten. There's a PDF there, and then you will see each of the outcomes listed below. And so what you can do is you can click on those outcomes, do a Control-C or copy them, and then you can pop back over to your long-range plan template, and you can paste them into the box of the week that you would like to cluster them in and incorporate it into. So if this happens to be a week where one of the outcomes that you're looking at is exploring messages, children exploring how they can be organized, then you can copy this outcome right into the sheet right here. And we know that we want to be able to be efficient and effective. So if you choose to include outcomes for more than one subjects, great. If you would rather make a copy of this whole sheet, so it's just English and language arts and literature on this one, and then another version for math or another version for other subjects, that's up to you to decide what works best. Following the insertion of those those learning outcomes, you will see that there is a reflection section so that you can come back at the end of that week or two and think about, what is something you really want to remember for the future? Which assessments successfully revealed evidence of learning? Which areas of content required more support or revision for students? How will you group and regroup students to consider their strengths and stretches? And anything else that you wanted to capture in terms of resource notes. This particular format we thought would be flexible. You can add rows, you can take rows out if there's too many different layers and you want something a little bit more simple, but we've tried to really include the pieces that we think are really essential while thinking big picture about how to meet student needs, how to focus on assessment, and how to consider learning for transfer in the big picture. And so as you flow along as you scroll along the lines of this, you'll see that we've outlined the entire school year for you week by week. And again, with different prompting questions to think about how best to include all learners. And so that is the template that we've created for the responsive long-range plan. I've also given you a chance to see the second sheet in this document, which is the learning outcomes. If you keep scrolling down, you'll see the orange section for mathematics with PDFs at each grade level and a copy of each of those outcomes. Keep going down again, and you'll find phys ed and wellness for grades 1 or kindergarten through grade 6. The next piece that I'd like to share with you is the unit planning template. And so following along on the tabs that connect to the sheets, you will see our responsive unit planning template. Now, this piece, it leans a lot on some of the learning that we have done over the past couple of years with Dr. Garfield Jenny Newman of the Critical Thinking Consortium. And so you'll see a blend of ideas that come from that really incorporate the architecture of the new curriculum, but also think about learning for transfer and really offering that critical thinking lens on the learning that you're designing in that unit template. There's lots of great answers. There's lots of right answers for how you might pull your instructional design together. And we hope that this might offer some suggestions for how you might like to organize your collaborative planning and your thinking. So using the, as you just go in a linear way, the initial planning step offers a space to write an essential understanding where you can use the organizing idea, guiding questions, and key concepts to sort of frame what the students will understand after experiencing the learning of this sequenced area. We have a spot for key concepts where you can highlight or select the most important abstract mental constructs that are really help to transfer that learning to other places, so other situations rather. So when you think about a concept, it would be something like change or identity or the concept of number. There's so many different concepts. And so for all of the work that we've done over the past few years, thinking about teaching for conceptual understanding, we can pull those beautifully from the new outcomes, and you'll be able to continue to focus on those in your unit planning. The next section here is including all learners. And so as we wanted to do in the long-range responsive plan, this responsive unit plan is also meant to really be mindful of including all learners. So this prompt here in the blue box on row 8 asks you to really think about all of the students in your care and what are their areas of strength and readiness. Use these spaces to create to document some of those important pieces that you need to remember. Think about barriers that you might need to remove, things that you want to include in terms of choice or supports for different students, so that you're really thinking ahead for how to engage all learners. The next piece is asking you to write an overarching critical question. Garfield Jenny Newman talks about problematizing the learning by reframing an interesting topic as a question. Some of his great questions are things like, Are we drinking the same water that the dinosaurs drank when they were on the earth? Or, he often likes to use pop culture and shared an example one time of, is Shrek a good friend? So something that can really be debatable, something that can be that will capture the attention of the students and will offer us this opportunity to think and to really add to our learning over time. There's lots more questions there that we can come up with. If you're interested in unpacking that a little bit further, just reach out and let us know. The next spot is where you think about the product or the performance that students will communicate in terms of what they will do with that learning at the end of a learning sequence. What's the critical challenge is introduced at the very beginning of an inquiry or in the beginning of a unit, so that they can know what the target is and continue to build on that learning throughout the time that you are working through all of the lessons and scaffolding those pieces. As you scroll a little bit to the right, there's a spot to offer you a wonderful tool called A Guide to Success. There's different versions and templates there for you. And also a chance for you to think about the success criteria that will be really important for the critical challenge. So if you're going to design a museum exhibit, or perhaps you're going to create a community map, or a class book, or maybe the students are designing a model of something that they have created. Whatever it is, you want to be really clear from the onset what that criteria for success will be. And that can help you to develop rubrics and to develop the thinking throughout the rest of the units. Just as in the long range plan, we've also included a spot for you to highlight or circle the competencies that are most relevant to that particular component of learning. Often we're using so many of them at the same time, but it's really important to be intentional and to teach the skills involved in developing those competencies along the way. As you move forward, you can see that there's a spot for designing the experiences. What engaging experience will provoke students to become active in the learning? And so here's a spot where you can really think how you're going to capture them. A learning launch is a compelling question. And if you click here, you can see that there are a variety of templates available for you to sort of offer the students a chance to dig into that compelling question in a relevant way. The learning launch is an opportunity to have students offer up their initial ideas. What's their initial thoughts before even digging into the learning? And you can use something like a fulcrum or a dashboard, or perhaps they have to rank their ideas. What is the most dangerous animal in this particular ecosystem in terms of, what children or students already know going into the unit. And then you have to develop the criteria for, well, what makes it dangerous and how do we know? And then they can start to, as they learn a little bit more, they can come back to their ladder and adjust their thinking based on new evidence, always explaining and offering a sound evidence that they have come to uncover. So you can see that through this responsive unit planner, we've tried to include lots of different features that might help to elevate the critical thinking in your design. It's always great to think about your audience. Who will this work be shared with? And then there's a little bit of further information about using a thought book, which is a wonderful tool to allow students to really capture their learning and thinking along the way. Once you have that initial stage planned, this is where you start to think about what the actual lessons and learning will look like. And so the lines of inquiry is where you do the intentional learning sequencing. And so if in order to be able to solve that critical challenge, what are the pieces that need to help students get there? And so each line of inquiry might be a series of lessons where you're scaffolding, you're introducing basic skills and knowledge, you're giving an opportunity to practice those pieces, and you're building on the learning that they need in order to be able to revisit that critical question and come back to that evidence along the way. You'll see here that there's a chance to consider how every learner will access the information and the content. What's an accessible starting point for each student? Where do you want the students to get to? What's essential learning in that, within these outcomes? Are there parts that are maybe accessible and essential for all, and then perhaps nice to know if you can extend or get students to a certain area? There's also an opportunity for ongoing monitoring, documenting, and guiding that learning to inform the next steps. And so you can see in this section here that we really want to think about, how do you build on that line of inquiry? Maybe it's a series of lessons that you need. Maybe not all students need to do all parts, and maybe it doesn't need to look the same. But for each line of inquiry, or there's a series of lessons that will help to build that, and you can pull it all together there. There's space in this planner for 6 different lines of inquiry, and of course you modify this according to your needs and what that unit might look like. And a reminder to check in often, using a guide to success to support that learning. So as you flow down through this unit planner, you'll see that there is a chance to always revisit, to put your ideas out there, to plan it ahead, but to always revisit and be flexible about shifting and moving along. The very end of this particular document is a chance to document how you will document how you present, demonstrate, and complete that critical challenge. What's that going to look like? And then what reflections do you have? And so we've included lots of different pieces in this unit plan, which is actually it's many parts that will be familiar to you, and perhaps there's some questions or some prompts that might encourage you to think a little bit differently about the pieces that you're already including. So we hope that will be useful for you. If we go down to the bottom and we look along the sheets that are attached within this, you'll see a tab called Planning, Webs, Mind Maps, and Thinking Templates. In this particular page, you will find a link to 25 free Google graphic drawing organizers that we did not make, but we are shamelessly adding into this particular piece because we think that it offers you lots of opportunities to think about how to integrate the learning and how to really pull your teammates together, all for the benefit of students and their learning. So check it out. And the very last piece that I'd like to share with you in this particular template is the last sheet at the bottom of the tabs. It's called Assessment Timeline. And this is something that was used in one of the schools that I worked with recently. And so it can be contextualized in terms of all of the key dates and assessment touch points that you use in your school. And so we've kind of outlined it monthly as a timeline, and perhaps this could be used for teachers. You could also tweak it and make it for parents, but it's basically acknowledging that throughout the whole year, you're working through that ongoing monitoring and documenting that formative assessment for and as learning. And then it's just sort of a calendar of what are some important things that are really happening for you in terms of that assessment mindset, and for you and your colleagues throughout the year. When do you meet the teacher, or do you have a curriculum night? When do you capture some of that transfer information that you use to move students from grade to grade? At what point will your diagnostics be completed, and how will you look together at the data to really know how to use that information to inform your next steps? And so we hope that this will be another piece that you can make your own and can be a useful tool that can help you to feel organized and succinct and connected with your colleagues all through the process. So I know that there's a lot of detail in here. We hope that you will take some time to give it a try. Any feedback is always welcome. We want to make this useful. We want to go right back to our criteria again. Make it useful, make it easy, make it importantly and responsively making learning better for students. When you go onto our website and find this document, you will find that we have created a playlist of that will help to organize this particular collection of materials. And so we hope you enjoy going through each of those parts with us. And I thank you for your time today, and thank you for giving it a try. Have a great day.